Chapter 2, the Constitution.
For many American colonists, the decision to turn on Great Britain and seek independence from the mother country was not an easy one. In fact, as late as January 1776, many important leaders of the colony still pledged their loyalty to the crown. After all, the penalties for treason were the severest, and King George III and the British Parliament were anxious to squash any rebellious acts after the Boston Tea Party. But the king continued to levy increasingly burdensome taxes and lord strict regulations over the colonies. When he also hired foreign mercenaries to use terror to control colonial uprisings, Thomas Paine had had enough. Paine, a one-time corset maker, had left England for Philadelphia only a month earlier. But he had long had disdain for the tyranny of England's monarch. While struggling to earn a living in the colonies, Paine decided to try his hand at writing. His pamphlet, Common Sense, which he wrote in January 1776, became one of the most influential documents in American history. Common Sense was Paine's opportunity to unleash his anger on King George. Until his writing, most colonial leaders had been careful to craft humble and gracious requests for more fair treatment from the crown. But Paine pulled no punches, bluntly referring to King George as a royal brute who was unworthy of Americans' respect. Common Sense even went so far as to say American hostility was not caused by Parliament, but solely by the monarch's tyrannical malice toward the colonists. Mother England decided to clamp down on its rebellious colonists with the Prohibitory Act. King George III also decided to hire foreign mercenaries to go to the colonies and crush any resistance to his harsh rule. For many colonists, this was the final straw. They could now see a peaceful reconciliation with England was no longer possible. And on June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee, a Virginia delegate, introduced a resolution to the Continental Congress. In it, he stated that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. But congressmen wanted a more formal document drafted that would not only declare independence, but also unify all the colonies, justify their actions to other nations, and pave the way for foreign alliances. So a committee was appointed to draft a Declaration of Independence. The committee consisted of some of the colony's most respected leaders: Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, and Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson spent 2 weeks writing the first draft, which the committee then edited. In the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson drew his statements from discussions of the Continental Congress, from other colonial governments' proclamations, and from the writings of John Locke, an Enlightenment philosopher. He constructed the document in 3 parts. First was the preamble, in which he referred to the natural rights of humankind when he wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." It also included Locke's contention that people have the right to overthrow their government when it abuses their fundamental rights. The second part of the Declaration draws parallels with Paine's Common Sense, directly attacking King George III with a lengthy list of his violations of American rights. The third of this most famous of American documents justifies the colonists' actions by describing their failed attempts to petition the king and Parliament for more peaceful resolutions. These final paragraphs also declare the colonies' independence, with the words, "These united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved." On the 4th of July, 1776, the delegates of the Second Continental Congress voted to approve and adopt the Declaration of Independence. This vote made each congressman guilty of treason, which bound them together in brotherhood. As Benjamin Franklin stated, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately."
Our first form of government we had in the United States was under the Articles of Confederation. The states retained most of the power, and the central government had very limited role in the governing process. It was pretty much what the states wanted, the states got. And most of the loyalty the individual citizens had was to their state and not to the country. The primary reason these individuals came together was to defeat the British. They were unhappy with their laws and the rules over the colonists, and they joined together to gain independence from Britain. You know, the more people, the stronger the unity of the colonies. Once independence was granted, there was less pressure on the states to organize for the collective good. With the creation of the Articles remained the lack of a strong central authority to resolve disputes between the states. So to organize the states for collective good, including such things as a militia, was crucial to the development of the Constitutional Convention. Events such as Shays' Rebellion convinced many political leaders of the need for a stronger central government. If you remember, Shays' Rebellion was a group of Massachusetts farmers who were losing their land. They couldn't pay back their debt, and they were kind of on a rampage, and the governor had to call mercenary soldiers to come and put down the rebellion. The own state militias would not take part. There was no way to fund them and to really force them to do their job. And this convinced leaders that the Articles were too weak and that the U.S. needed a stronger central government. Right now, in the 1780s, the Articles were considered more of a firm league of friendship. And so political leaders were unhappy with what was going on. They met in Philadelphia, and within a week, they voted to abandon the Articles of Confederation, and they started to working on a new document that we currently have, the Constitution. In the summer of 1787, a group of 55 people from 12 of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia, and in about 100 days, they created the U.S. Constitution. The only state not to send someone was Rhode Island. The framers, when they met in Philadelphia, they knew the Articles weren't the answer. And before, under King George III, they knew that his dictatorship was not the answer. And so they tried to find a combination where the states had the power to organize and to create order among the people, but yet people still wanted to feel like they had their liberty. When the people came together, there were people coming from small states, large states, and so you can imagine everyone kind of had a different opinion on how to write this Constitution. At this time, there's really no blueprint to copy on this magnitude. And so the Virginia plan was proposed, and that is with 3 branches of government, bicameral Congress. Do we have this today? Yeah, we have a bicameral Congress. Bi meaning 2. The first house was directly elected by the people, and the second, which is today called the Senate, was chosen by the first house. So the senators at a long time ago were all chosen by the House of Representatives. Representation would be based on population. Large states and wealthy states supported this idea. Now we have since changed how we elect our senators. With the 17th Amendment, which was passed in the 1913, we, the people, directly elect the senators. And the small states fired back with their own proposal, their own plan. And their plan was called the New Jersey Plan. And this is where states were equally represented. Well, if we have a plan, the Virginia plan which was in favor by the large states, and we have the New Jersey plan, which was in favor of the small states. Well, they all came together, and we came up with the founders came up with the Connecticut Compromise, also called the Great Compromise, in which we have the House based on population and the Senate based on equal representation from all states. Currently, in the House, we have 435 members. In the Senate, we have 100. 100, each state has 2, 50 states, 100 representatives. But the people in the South weren't totally sold on the idea of the Great Compromise. They wanted their slaves to count as a vote. The more, they had a lot of slaves, which means they would have a lot more power. So they came up with the 3/5 compromise, in which each slave would be counted as 3/5 of a vote. The North was not happy, but they agreed on this on the principle that they must pay taxes on the slaves. Now, the North or the South came up with the agreement too, where they wanted the North to leave slavery alone. And it was agreed upon that Congress would not touch the issue of slavery till after 1808. So in the summer of May 1787, we had this group of delegates, 55, from across 12 colonies, come together in what is known today as Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And in a small room, these 55 people worked in secrecy. We had the Articles of Confederation, and these individuals are trying to change the whole makeup of the country to shift it from the Articles to the Constitution. And they did it in secrecy because they didn't want to upset the people. Now that they have the document written, they have to now go and sell it to the people. And there was 2 groups, one in favor and one who opposed the idea of the Constitution. We have the Federalists who supported the idea, and the anti-Federalists. So the U.S. Constitution is created. We have the Federalists who are going to try to persuade people to support the idea of the Constitution. We have the anti-Federalists who want to go back to the Articles. The Federalists are large landowners, wealthy merchants, professionals, and they favored a weaker state government and a stronger national government. They didn't want somebody standing right over them, but they wanted to know that their assets were secure. And under the Articles, there was no way to force the other militias to come and help and support. And if you have money, you want to know that it is safe. They promised to add amendments specifically protecting individual liberties once the Constitution was ratified. And the Federalist Papers were an attempt to persuade the public to support the new form of government. They put 85 essays or 85 papers throughout the colonies trying to persuade them and explain to them what the Constitution was about. In Federalist number 10, which you will read later on in the semester, James Madison makes an argument in this essay about adopting the Constitution in which it will help control fascism or individual groups like Shays' Rebellion and prevent these incidents from happening. In Federalist 51, as you read, Madison begins this essay with talk of having 3 separate branches of government: the judicial, legislative, and executive branch. The most powerful branch of government, Madison thought, was the legislative branch. So he kept it close to the people. Every 2 years we would have an election for the House of Representatives, and every 6 years we'd have an election for the Senate. He broke up the branches, trying to prevent it from becoming too powerful. And then we have the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. Remember, legislative branch creates the laws. That's why they're considered the most powerful or most dangerous group of people that Madison thought. And then we have the executive branch, which enforces the law. And then we have the judicial branch, which interprets the law. So the anti-federalists, we talked about the federalists being the people with money wanting favored a weak state government and a strong central government. The anti-federalists were just the opposite. They favored a strong state government and a weak national government. And this is the small market people, the farmers, the shopkeepers, the laborers, and the one thing that they required or was a must to them was a Bill of Rights. And that is why it was added so quickly once the Constitution was passed. When the Federalists said that they would add it, and then the Anti-Federalists joined on and said, okay, we'll go in favor of it. So here is a chart on the ratification of the Constitution. As you can see, it started off with Delaware in 1787, all the way down to Rhode Island in May 29th of 1790. The Bill of Rights were passed in 1791, just a little over 2 years after the Constitution was signed or created. The Bill of Rights can be considered a bill of limits on what the government can do to the people. There are no explicit limits on state government powers. The restrictions were only to the national government until the 14th Amendment incorporated some of these rights. Every government needs to be able to cope with any new and unforeseen problem. Any constitutional change should, however, be taken with extreme caution. If the process to amend the Constitution is too rigorous, there should be ample time to consider the merits of such a. Of all the 27 amendments, the quickest one to pass was the 26th Amendment, which allows 18-year-olds the right to vote. This amendment only took 3 months and 7 days. From 1791 through 2002, there have only been 17 amendments, a statistic which averages one amendment every 12.4 years. Amending the Constitution. There are 4 ways an amendment can be added. The first way, amendments need to be proposed by a 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress and then ratified by legislatures in 3/4 of the states. This has happened 26 of the 27 times. Or by a 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress and then ratified by conventions in 3/4 of the state. This has been done once, the 21st Amendment, which repealed the 18th Amendment, which allowed people to drink again. The other way would be by a national convention called by a Congress at the request of 2/3 of the state legislators, and then be ratified by legislators in 3/4 of the states, or by ratifying conventions in 3/4 of the states. This has never been done. In addition to the formal amendment process, there are also informal methods of constitutional change. While there have been very few formal amendments to the Constitution over the centuries, informal change has occurred on a more frequent basis. These informal changes have been brought about through a number of different avenues, including legislation enacted by Congress acting under the Commerce Clause. The Constitution has also been changed through the practice of the President of the United States, including the use of executive agreements to conduct foreign policies as an alternative to the constitutional treaty process. The Supreme Court claimed the power of judicial review in the case of Marbury versus Madison, and has been making assertions on what the Constitution means in the centuries since. Finally, day-to-day governmental activities, interpretations, customs, and traditions have influenced the meaning of the Constitution.